Welcome everybody to the next session of Coffee with Catha. I'm very happy today that I can welcome Ralph Rupprecht.
Yeah, thanks Catha. Thanks, Catherine, for having me.
We decided today to speak about talent scouting. And now you're at Amgen for more than 6 years, right? And there you work as a talent scout. And first of all, I would like to give you the chance to introduce yourself, please.
I began my career almost 15 years ago when I started as a recruitment consultant for the life science industry at that time. And I really came into this by coincidence with a very diverse background. So I just had graduated as an automotive designer from an international design school in Italy. So a completely different, diverse background, but due to lack of opportunities in Switzerland and my passion for science and communication, I got a chance to prove myself in a completely different environment. And I loved it. Mm-hmm. So there I made my first experience it was primarily an environment of smaller boutique search firms with focus on retained search, primarily supporting larger pharma and biotech clients at that time. And then a bit more than 6 years ago, as you just said, I got the opportunity to join my current employer, Amgen, a global biopharmaceutical company, who gave me the opportunity to build the internal talent scout service model, something from scratch. It was really kind of positioned as a pilot at the beginning, but luckily I could make, let's say, the proof of concept. I could make the service model very successful and popular in the organization, and was able also to evolve now the service and bringing it from a regional European level at that time, so to above regional and global level today.
And I remember when we met the first time, talent scouting is not so familiar for me. I mean, I work for Recruit. I'm hiring or I'm recruiting HR experts. You're also an HR expert, but I was really listening. Ralph, you're a talent scout. This is a little bit newer for me, so that's why I was really happy that we choose the topic. What is a talent scout? Because when I remember the first time when we spoke about it, I was thinking of sports, like I imagine like a talent scout at the football game, then he's looking the players, how they play the game, and then they bring them to the next
club. Yeah.
The sports club, exactly. So that's how I was connecting talent scout. But now with you, talent scout in recruiting, can you tell me about it? What does a talent scout do? What do you do all day?
Yeah. So the talent scout in the industry is basically a strategic extension to recruitment, with the aim to build talent pools of industry leaders, experts in regards to future critical roles in the organization. And so here the talent scout can play an interface between different function and stakeholders also. So on one hand, you're interacting with the client or the business sponsor, so who can be any business leader in the organization who wants to ensure a robust talent bench strength for her or his team. Then also you interact with talent management. Basically, the function is collecting internal talent data and are preparing succession plans. Basically, help to take a more targeted approach with that talent data. Then also you have the respective HR business partners for the functions who support the business clients, and obviously also aware of any internal talent moves and needs. And the critical role, basically, what is that? This can be defined as a role where you don't have strong enough internal bench strength from a succession planning perspective, and where the organization may run a risk to have a succession gap in the future.
Yeah, sorry. I just have a question in mind, because when you are a talent scout, and I really understand what you do, but then at the end, are you also recruiting the people, because you are in contact the whole time with new talents?
Correct. So not directly, actually. So you prepare basically a talent pool where then recruitment can basically plug in at some point when you have an active requisition or when you have an active need, and already at that time, ideally, have prospect candidates or kind of a short list, which have gone to previous discussion, and they're able to enter a recruitment process. And that's basically also then the difference when you hand over the process to the recruiter who is in charge of that, who manages the end-to-end recruitment process and does the interview planning. But I'm also quite often involved in that process from an assessment perspective, or then along the process when it comes to interviews or final decisions. So obviously, as they considered my candidates or my prospects, which I brought to the process. So I basically have also a helicopter view on that.
Like where do you spend most of the time? I can imagine when you search for new talents, you're building up the talent pools, you're building up the talent pipelines. Are you then always connecting with people on LinkedIn, or how can I imagine your day?
Basically, the major bulk of work is really building that talent network, and that's something you don't. I mean, Rome wasn't built in a day, I would say. Also, this is quite similar. You build it over time, and you can do that with a specific expertise. As said, I brought that already from my life science experience background, and it helps really if you also narrow down that a little bit. But still, it's a very broad and complex field. So what you're doing really kind of normally build first, if it's for a specific function, let's say you want to build a talent pool for a specific role, then you start with a market map. And how to approach people. It can be through professional social media. It can be referrals you get from the business directly through your network. Sometimes it's also the alumni people. So ex-employees of your company, you just kind of, who left in good terms, and you stayed in contact with them. And at some point you want to bring them back to the company. So there are many sourcing channels which you would include in that approach to build your, let's say, overall market map. And then you start kind of engaging in terms of having an exploratory conversation to understand about people's motivation, aspiration, interest. And you can also share, obviously, things about your company. That's where they're kind of most interested in, right? The values, how is it to work in your environment? And I think that's really the value I'll add also of these discussions.
Yeah, as I understand it, talent scout, please correct me if I'm wrong. I also see him as an employer ambassador, that you are the first contact. Of course, we also have the recruiter, and you also said that the further process you give to the recruiter themselves. That's why I was also thinking, what is the real difference between you as a talent scout and also the recruiter?
We work alongside with recruiters, but I think one clear difference is that recruitment is normally kind of reactive. So you work on active recs, open recs, right? You have your time to fill, time to hire for that. So quite specific, where talent scouting is more proactive. So you work on future potential needs, right? And sometimes you don't even have a clear timeline. I would say normally wouldn't go much further than 2 years, because that's not tangible anymore. So everything that's probably 6 and 18 months is more realistic also when you enter discussions with future potential interested people in that context. So that's very important to understand. So it's really proactive. Then I think another added value of this, obviously you gain a lot of insights along the process, not only about the people, but also about what's going on in other organizations. And that's also sometimes interesting to share. As I said, either would be about values or also organizational structure, things like that you're discussing as far as you can discuss on a very open level. So that's one other difference. Plus also reactional than transactional, so recruitment always compared with that. Plus you have obviously a cost avoidance you generate, because normally recruitment can be outsourced as well in larger companies, right? When you don't have this internal sourcing or scouting capability, so you can save costs with that. And again, you act, as you said before, you act as a company ambassador, which you're very close to the business, right? You from within the company, so you can share also really very authentically how it is to work in a company. That's also a strong value add, which is also very well received when having these conversations with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is what I understand from you from the beginning, that when you described your job, that I see really that you are connected with so many parts, like in the middle, turning around to every department. If it's recruiting, I think you need to work very, very closely. You are now in a larger company, and now you split these positions. You have a talent scout, you have recruiters. But what do you think about that you combine these positions? Because I mean, I'm also a recruiter, and somehow I feel that I'm also being a talent scout besides.
I think that's a very also, I think it's also within our current context, most of our recruiters also, they're actively sourcing people and have kind of their, let's call them mini pipelines. I think that's important to have your own personal network. There's certainly only maybe just a limited amount of time, or you have time to dedicate to this specific activity. That's why I do it at broader scale, and in my case, mainly for executive roles. It's really kind of this long-term engagement you have with people until something, happens. I mean, I can tell anecdotes, examples of people who have been in contact for many, many years until they finally get an offer and had an opportunity to join the company. But I think these are the rewarding moments you have then, and you need to be very resilient also over time. But exactly what you said, I think we can all be talent scouts. I would say even the business, we want them to be very proactive in terms of, owning also their business contacts, having these informal conversations, let's say, along the process, generating that dialogue. This is when it comes to really have an exchange and get to know each other better. So the timeline is much larger. But I think it's very important. If you don't have a dedicated resource, you can embed it or integrate it into another source at a small scale, certainly.
Yeah, and as you say, it's just a matter of time. I mean, I really like that idea when I'm hearing from you that you said, I'm just focusing on talent scouting. I mean, as I said, I'm doing it besides, but sometimes I feel I have not enough time for all these things. So I really like that you're focusing on that. And I also was remembering when you said you work in recruitment since 2013, right? And you always have a big backpack. You worked at an agency. You were always focusing on recruiting. So what do you think? What does a talent scout need to become a talent scout? Is it necessary that you already have recruiting experience? What is your opinion about it?
It starts really with your network. That's the capital. You can build that over time, certainly. But I think this is really where you also get all the information. And again, this is something you grow for a specific era. And you need to have a genuine interest in people, because you're communicating on a daily basis, either by phone, video, or even live at occasions, let's say conferences, or you meet them at different other occasions. So that's very important. I think listening skills as well, right? Because you listen to those stories, and based on that first initial contact, I think it's so important, right? To get a sense, a feeling of the person's motivation, but also cultural fit and interest. And that's really where you build that rapport, that relationship. So I think kind of also these interpersonal skills, because you need to put people at ease when you're talking to the first time with them and without knowing them. So, and sometimes you might enter a bit more personal dialogue. People open up more easily. It depends really on the situation. And you know all that from recruitment as well. Most of the people I'm talking to, they have a solid job, right? And they're maybe not even actively looking for something. And to make them open up sometimes, you need to trigger the right things. Plus, as I think I mentioned that before, resilience, because these wins, they don't come easy. It's not like with hiring, maybe within the first 2 or 3 months, you can get your first hire. You can tick that box. It can take quite a long time, right? Until you bring someone over the finish line. You also, obviously, you have, candidate fallouts. People decide to go different ways, or then maybe reconnect with them at a later point in time. So all these things, but I think you need to have a general interest in people, right? You need to like the communication aspect.
Yeah, as I understand your job, what you do, I really have this feeling that you are getting more in the personal situation of the candidates. Because when I think about when I have a job, then I have requirements and I'm looking for the right candidates. But as you said, for you, it's like a long-term relationship, what you build up. And I think for you, it's also important that you know what are the goals, what are the wishes of these candidates. Of course, it's also important for me as a recruiter, but I think it's a little bit similar. You're working more in the future.
Exactly. And sometimes it's even, you generate almost kind of a friendship, right? It's with people you follow so many years, right? And they share, obviously you share more things than just job related things. So that gives you the very human touch. But these are things also sometimes make the difference, right? As said, you have more time to get to know each other better. And I think when it really comes then to a situation where you have a proposition, then it probably doesn't take so much time to decide whether that would be the right move or not. Again, if the timing is right, but again, that's really the value.
And I think it's also important that you can build up trust, right?
If you can break that ice at the beginning, and sometimes really you share also anecdotes about your personal experience, these things, sometimes you don't even go straight to the business. and or you have a common background or something that links you to each other, right? It's maybe similar like your coffee talks, right? You speak about very personal things, your personal experience, and that's so important, right? When it comes then obviously to more concrete role or something, you go more into details, into technical details, but that's something also where it's very important to link then to the business. You can have a more in-depth conversation, right, about specific experience. But I often ask people about the personal highlights, right? What is important? What is a career highlight? It's interesting sometimes what they tell me, and sometimes can also be a personal highlight, right? There's a combination of both.
Challenges and highlights. What is your highlight from a perspective to be a talent scout? What is your highlight and what is your challenge?
I think the highlight is definitely that when I, more than 6 years ago, had this opportunity to build up something new for the company. Again, it was an experiment at the beginning, and then I could make it successful. But I had a lot of, let's say, freedom to kind of build that function, that service model within the organization. Also to try some things, and it's not always that everything works right at the beginning. So prepare for setbacks and just define things newly. But that was certainly a great opportunity, and I'm very happy that I had it on. Also to bring in my background in such a role, and I would say still it's a relatively niche role, but as it's really exposed to different stakeholders, it has quite a large visibility. That's also something I like, and for me personally, very important, right? That obviously you gain that visibility because I mean you want to share also these talent prospects. You need to engage with people within your organization. Challenges, I mean, clearly we talk about talents, about external talents, and there's a war for talent, not only in our industry but in general. And nowadays it's even much more about, it's not only about benefits, it's really about the work environment, the values, flexible work settings. I mean, just even before the pandemic, that was for some people, very much important, top of the list, especially younger talents. When you talk to them, you see there's a great demand for, I mean, what the employee gives you in terms of also flexibility, things like that. And this is also a challenge, how you position that. And I think then there's sometimes very specific niche roles, niche functions where you don't find profiles easily. And where you also need to compete with maybe others who are just kind of struggling to find them. Then again, you need to come with the right value proposition, I think. What makes the difference? Why would you come to our company and not to the other? To get that feeling? I think that's very important, because it's a commitment in the end. We spend so much time at work, and it's so important, right, to find the right environment where you can perform.
And would you say that all the talents you are contacting or you scouting, are these all passive candidates?
Not necessarily all. I think the majority, yes, because I focus also on very specific roles at the time, but it often happens that just by coincidence, or they're looking for something new, or over time, right? When you have already entered the dialogue, they said, at some point, maybe in six months from now, so I'm looking for a new opportunity, either internally or also externally, because from my development journey, I'm eager to move on. And so you find all types of basically, but normally, right, I'm targeting those who kind of settled in a role and not necessarily looking for a new job.
You also mentioned something before, the war of talents, and that leads me to the next questions. Why does a company need a talent scout? I mean, you said you are in a very unique role, and you really appreciate it. This is one of your highlights, that you could create this role for you. Why do you think, is this the only reason, like the war of talents, or what would you say?
Again, I think the role really helps the business to make an informed hiring decision, because you always benchmark your external talent with internal talent. I mean, in an ideal world, you always have an internal successor ready at the right moment. That's not the case, obviously. But I think it's important that when it comes to decision, when it comes to these kind of burning platform hiring needs, when you have an open rec, it's also sometimes these critical roles that can cost a lot of money. In different contexts, it's also important, right, that you have continuity of the business. So therefore, it's really important that your can bring basically all the talent options available on the market to the business. So you don't only see just a segment, you have the internal view, you have the external view, the insights, and then make a decision on that. And sometimes really this delta between this gap, if you say there's just a small difference, and we can maybe train our internal talent based on this little gap. So it's maybe worth investing in the internal talent. I think that's also important to see that benchmark. It's really to create that holistic picture on talent.
Yeah, and this is also what I see again when you describe or when you answer this question, that I really see your connection between the other departments, that you also need to know what internal talents you have, that you can really discuss about it. So it's a very complex function, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. It really intertwines, it interfaces with a lot of different functions. I think it's also important, again, it depends, let's say, how you're sophisticated your talent management, talent development approach is in certain companies, certainly at a smaller scale or doesn't even exist. That's why talent acquisition as such is a relatively large and broad family with all these different focuses on let's say, on a hiring journey, from attracting to, hiring, developing talent. Then there you have all different stages and specific functions dedicated to that. But I would say the talent scout role is really interfaces with all these functions at different levels and help kind of also feed and give some information to basically create the best base for talent.
I mean, I work with the different companies, huge ones, small ones, startups, so different kinds. And you are coming from a big organization, international wise. What size or type of company should use talent scouting? Can you give an advice?
I mean, it depends really obviously on the investment, how much time you want to dedicate, how much resources you can dedicate it to that. Even at a smaller scale, if it's important, I think if you're one-man show, certainly not, right? Then you'll probably have your small network, and there is going to be a succession, or it's just for very small companies, because then it's already embedded. You have your network and probably know people who can replace you. But still, I would say smaller size company can benefit from that, again, because it generates a lot of insights. And even if you don't have a very complex or diversified talent acquisition function, it can be even embedded in the recruitment role, as we discussed before, right? That you have this extension so on top of your recruitment activities, you do sourcing and build your mini pools. And I think that can always bring a lot of value. If, let's say, if for the sake of size, you don't have the money to invest in that resource, but at some point, it really pays off. From a financial, from an insights perspective, again, also from a candidate experience, because it's something you mentioned that before. You act as a company ambassador. You get information firsthand. You share this information, so it's a very authentic voice you get, and that's also important for the company. You make the first impression, basically. You can sometimes also even help changing people's mind. Maybe they had a bad impression of the company, and then once they've talking to someone from the company, they find out maybe reality is a bit different. But coming back to your question, I think there's not a clear answer to that. I mean, from even smaller size company, it can be integrated in some way. I think it's even important to have it, let's say, as an extension to recruitment nowadays, and to build your own little mini network. Or if recruiters do that already.
I mean, as you mentioned, it's like the war of talent, and I really see that the recruiters, they are trying to find different methods to get to the right talent. And I really see if you're calling it the recruiter, and also he does a little bit of talent sourcing or whatever, I think it's really important that you just focus, that you know that it's there, and that you really have a focus on it, because it's so difficult to find the right people. I think you need to be experienced, right? I mean, when you imagine there is coming a young, maybe you can also say from your experience, when you have like a young recruiter and he now listens to this interview and he's like, now I really can identify myself with Ralph, and I also want to become a talent scout. What do you think? Isn't it necessary also to be more experienced in this area? And you also need to bring your network. This is what you said before, right?
I think experience you gain over time, but you need to start somewhere, right? And obviously there are different levels, and you can learn it. It's something. It's not rocket science, but obviously the longer you're in such a role, you become more comfortable and probably can also overcome certain setbacks. I think especially when I remember myself early in the career in consultancy. I mean, sometimes really also you suffer. It's right. It's very hard to create that matches, and sometimes you wish to have a bit more time, right, for yourself, to bring the numbers, so you're very much KPI driven, I would say, and which is fine, which is right, because it's a competitive market. But I think here you can really trust in these relationships you build, and at some point they pay off, right? It's not only about certainly the number of candidates you bring across the finish line, it's also about the quality of candidates, and again, the insights you gain along the way. So I think when you have that understanding and really find pleasure and draw energy out of these conversations, I think then you're at the right place, even at the younger stage. Again, so there's no specific requirement for that. Obviously, you need to know your industry well, the environment. I mean, I also do a lot of research on competitors and other companies to be prepared for certain discussions or questions. I think that's important.
I agree with you. I really love these interviews, Ralph. It's always so nice for me because I always learn something new. I would like to give you the word. We have finished all our questions. Would you like to say something else?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure, and always open for any other question that might come through the network or from other people who are kind of listening.
Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure to have you. Finished with my coffee. I think you're finished with your tea.
Almost done.